Welcome back to 340 Paddler, and today I want to talk about buoys. We need to deal with these massive steel things that you're going to see in the middle of the river. Now, there are two types of buoys. And of course, a buoy is, in this case, generally an unlit can buoy. And they look something like this. We have green buoys and red buoys. And they're massive. These things are over 6 feet tall. They weigh somewhere around a ton. They're held to the bottom of the river with these massive blocks of concrete, which are not nearly massive enough because the river is particularly strong. And they generally look something like this. We have the block at the bottom, and then the buoy moves around in the current because the chain is longer than what it needs to be. And this is a problem because you get debris or something on that chain and it pulls the buoy down, sometimes pulling it under, making for a very difficult situation. But we will get to that momentarily. Now, let's talk about navigation. How do you use these buoys? And I'm going to assume that you're going downriver. If you're going upriver, you would reverse all of this. So, when you come across these buoys, either the nun buoys or the can buoys, the red buoys should always be on the left, the green should always be on the right. If you get confused, look at your nav lights. Your nav lights have the red on the left and the green on the right, so they should match the buoys when you're going downriver, although it's not as big of an issue as you would think because they're mostly there for barges. And a barge is a massive boat that requires a specific draft of somewhere over 6 feet, which is why the channel in the Missouri is generally maintained at a minimum of 10 feet. Now, those buoys would generally be sitting out here, for example, in this curve. And as you can see, the buoys are there for the barge, for that very specific depth, but you are not in a barge. Maybe it feels like a day two, but you're not actually in a barge. You are in a kayak, which means you draft a lot less and you can be over here. Now, is that going to be the most efficient water? No. But if a barge is coming up, you can definitely be on the other side of the buoys. Or if you find yourself on the other side of the buoys, you don't need to panic about it. Just make sure that you're watching out for things like wing dikes, which actually we can see here up ahead. You can see right under my line here, there's a riffle that looks an awful lot like a wing dike there. So you just watch out for that and you're probably fine. Now, there are of course dangers to these buoys because they bob around, they move around. It's sort of like a ton of steel. Well, it is actually a ton of steel bouncing around in the river as if it's one of those little plastic bobbers you use to go fishing. So they can go underwater. You can see something like this. You do not want to go over it because if it happens to pop up out of the water while you're over it, it will damage your boat. In some cases, it could sink your boat. So it's going to be a particularly nasty experience. If you see something like this, stay clear. In fact, I'd like you to stay at least 50 feet from any buoy whenever practical. They can be out of place, so frequently after flooding events, you'll see the buoys had moved and they're not in the place that you would expect a buoy to be. So, lesson number 2, and the reason I'm not going over buoy placement real well is most years on the 340, with the exception of 2018 when all the buoys seem to be there, they tend to be out of place. You tend to find them in odd places, including in the middle of the channel. So you need to keep an eye out, which brings up another issue: fog. You do not want to come across a buoy in a fog. There is no technology which will tell you where a buoy is at night or in the fog. At night, you can listen for it, but in the fog, it tends to deaden sound. It makes it much more difficult. So if there's a fog, get off the river. Do not continue. So let's talk about this whole issue of GPS or Pro Paddler. In 2018, we had a lot of people who said, or a number of people, I shouldn't say a lot, but a number of people who went out and said, you know what, I have GPS, I'll just keep going through the fog. After all, I'm only, 10 miles from the finish or whatever the situation may be. So what happens? Well, this happens. This is where one of the boats actually hit a buoy in the middle of the night. You can see some of the green marks that have been left by the buoy. Now, this is a big, heavy carbon fiber Texas boat, so this one didn't have as much of a problem. Other boats, like a lightweight surf ski, would have an issue. Things like this. So this happened in 2018. They're traveling along, they're watching a GPS track. The GPS, of course, doesn't show certain things. It doesn't show barges, it doesn't show debris, and it doesn't show buoys. And this couple hit a buoy, got thrown into the water, very close to the finish line. Thankfully, there were other paddlers with them that helped them recover and get back in the boat and back into the race. But you can see this damage, and this is purely my own speculation, but this damage right here is going to be particularly nasty to repair. It looks like a minor crack, but in fact, it's probably creased right through the various layers of this boat, which means this needs to be repaired on the inside and the outside. This is a big repair. It may look little, but it is much worse than you would think. So, if there is fog or storm and you do not feel like you can see the buoys, get off the water. If you feel like you can just follow a track, get off the water, because you will hit a buoy and it will be a massive problem. After all, we just want to get everyone to the end of the race. By the way, this is the boat that we were just looking at after they had recovered. So make sure that you're watching out for those buoys, that you're using them properly for navigation, and that you never ever trust that the buoys are where they're supposed to be. They do move around, and in the fog or storms, you can't see them. So until next time, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, quarrels, qualms, quandaries, curse words, please leave them in the comments below. This is 340 Paddler, hoping that you keep your paddle in the water.